It is your union ought to be considered a main prop of your liberty, and that the love of loved one ought to endear you the preservation of the other. These considerations speak persuasive language to every reflecting and virtuous mind, and exhibit the continuance of the Union as a primary object of patriotic desire. Is there the doubt whether a common government can embrace so large a sphere? Let experience solve it. To listen to mere speculation in such case were criminal. We are authorized to hope that a proper organization of the whole with the auxiliary agency of government for the respective subdivisions will afford a happy issue to the experiment. It is well worth a fair and full experiment with such powerful and obvious motives to union, affecting all parts of our country. While experience shall not have demonstrated its impracticability, there will always be reason to distrust the patriotism of those who in any quarter may endeavor to weaken its bands. In contemplating the cause which may disturb our Union, it occurred as matters of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations, northern, southern, Atlantic, and western, whence designing men may endeavor to excite a belief that there is a real difference of local interests and views. One of the expendiments of parties to acquire influence with particular districts is to misrepresent the opinions and aims in other districts. You cannot shield yourself too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which spring from these misrepresentations. They tend to render alien to each other who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection. The inhabitants of our western country have lately had a useful lesson on this head. They have seen in the negotiation by the executive and in the unanimous ratification by the Senate of the Treaty with Spain, and in an universal satisfaction at that event throughout the United States, a decisive proof have unfounded were the suspicions propagated among them a policy of the general government and the Atlantic states unfriendly to their interests in regard to the Mississippi. They have been witnesses to the formation of two treaties that with Britain and that with Spain, which secure them everything they could desire in respect to our foreign nations, towards confirming their prosperity. Will it not be their wisdom to rely for the preservation of these advantages on the Union by which they were procured? Will they not henceforth the deaf to those advisers, if such there are, who would serve them like their brethren and connect them with aliens? To the efficacy and permanency of your Union, a government for the whole is indispensable. No alliance, however strict between parts, can be an adequate substitute. They must invariably experience the infractions and interruptions which all alliances in all times have experienced. Sensible from this momentous truth, you have improved upon your first essay by the adoption of the constitution of government better calculated than your former for an intimate union and for the efficacious management of your common concerns. This government, the offspring of your choice, uninfluenced and unarmed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles and the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment, has just a claim to your confidence and your support. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures, are duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. The basis of our political systems is the right people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the constitution which at any time exists till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, and scarcely obligatory upon all, The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. All obstructions to the execution of laws, all combinations and associations, under whatever plausible character, with the real design to direct, control, counteract, and awe the regular deliberation and action of the constituted authorities, and are destructive of this fundamental principle and fatal tendency. They serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial extraordinary force, to put it in the place of the delegated will of the nation, the will of the party, often a small but artful enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make a public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted or incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of consistent and wholesome plans digested by common councils and modified by mutual interest. However, combinations or associations of above description may now, then by answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious and unprincipled men will be unable to subvert the power of the people and to usurp them for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which they have lifted them upon unjust dominion. Towards preservation of your government, the permanency of your present happy state, it is requisite, not only that you steadily discontinues irregular opposition to its acknowledged authority, but also that you resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles, however specious the pretext. One method of assault may be to effect in the forms of the Constitution alterations which will impair the energy. Method of assault may be to effect in the forms of the Constitution. Sorry, I goofed up there. I'll just continue. One method of the assault may be in effect in the forms of the Constitution alterations which will impair the energy of the system and thus to undermine which cannot be directly overthrown. In all changes to which you may be invited, remember that time and habit are at least as necessary to fix the true character of governments as of other human institutions, that experience is the surest standard by which to test the real tendencies of the existing constitution of a country, that the facility changes upon the credit of mere hypothesis and opinion exposes to perpetual change from an endless variety of hypothesis and opinion. And remember, especially for that efficient manager of your common interest, in a country so extensive as ours, a government of as much vigor as consistent with the perfect security of liberty is indispensable. Liberty itself will find in such a government, with powers properly distributed and adjusted, its surest guardian. It is indeed little else than a name, where the government is too feeble to withstand the enterprises of faction, to confine each member of the society within the limits prescribed by the laws, and to maintain all the security and tranquil enjoyment of the rights of persons and property. I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its roots in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed, but in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness. It is truly the worst enemy. You hear that again? It is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, in which different ages and countries have perpetrated the most horrid enormities. It is a self-rightful despotism. But this leads at length to more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which would result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. And sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turned his disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty, without looking forward to extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight. The common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of the party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people and discourage and restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates community, which will ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, forms occasionally riot and insurrection. It opens the door in foreign influence and corruption, which finds and facilitates access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus, the policy and the will of the country are subjected to the policy and will of another. There is an opinion that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. This will certain limits is probably true, and in government from a monarchical cast, patriotism may look with indulgence, if not with favor, upon the spirit of party, but in those of the popular character in governments purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. From their natural tendencies, it is certain there will always be enough of that spirit for every salutary purpose, and there being constant dangers of excess, the effort ought to be by force of public opinion to agitate and assuage a fire not to be quenched. It demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest, instead of warming, it should consume. It is important, likewise, that the habits of thinking in a free country could inspire caution in those entrusted with this administration to confine themselves with their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the powers of the one department to encroach upon another. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all departments in one, and thus to create it, whatever form of government, a real despotism. Just an estimate of that love of power and proneness to abuse it, which predominates in the human heart, is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power by dividing and distributing it into different depositories and consulting each the guardian of the public real against invasions by the others, have been evinced by experiment, ancient and modern, some of them in our country and under our own eyes. To preserve them must be as necessary as to institute them. If in the opinion of the people the distribution of modification of constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by the amendment in which the way the Constitution designates, but let there be no charge by usurpation, for this, in one instance, may be instrument of the good. It is customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The president must always greatly overbalance the impermanent evil, any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. Yeah, it's pretty good so far. Wow. You know, I'm going to continue this on part 2, so bear with me.